It's going to be a bitter winter for Europe.
Britain is facing a crisis of confidence from the financial markets, which actually has been years in the making.
With Russia turning off the gas and OPEC cutting output, energy bills are soaring. Inflation is at an all-time high.
The country now faces prices more than 10% higher. 10%, think about that.
Rising prices are weighing heavily on low-income households.
There are some real harrowing challenges around customers having to choose between feeding families or paying bills.
The wealth gap is bigger than ever. Women and minority entrepreneurs are feeling the crunch as VC funding dries up. And the rise of far-right leaders in Europe is threatening regression of LGBTQ rights. Against this backdrop, how can we create equal opportunities across social classes, geographies, genders, and ethnicity? We convene business executives, thought leaders, policymakers, and artists to create a blueprint for growth that leaves no one behind. This is the Bloomberg Equality Summit.
Please welcome to the stage John Micklethwaite, Editor-in-Chief, Bloomberg.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Apologies for not being here as normal to welcome you this morning. I was trying to get a visa from the US Embassy, which is not an easy process. Whether you're joining us here or virtually, you are very welcome. The Equality Summit is now in its 5th year. We've hosted in New York, in Mumbai, and we're very pleased to be bringing it here. Our theme, as you just heard, is equal opportunities, which I think at this moment feels particularly pertinent in this country. You have rising energy prices, rising inflation, cost of living crisis. I was remarking outside that one of the more interesting things to me about the debacle of politics in the past few weeks was the fact that I think it's the first time ever I've never seen so few rich people in favor of a tax cut. And it's never, I think I only met one person over the course of the 2 weeks that the 45p thing lived who showed any enthusiasm for it at all, which I think is very, very rare. You didn't see it with the Trump tax cuts. You didn't see it with Osborne's. You didn't see it with any of these things. But you saw a lot of people, even at the top end of society, for whom inequality and inclusion had begun to matter far more, and they thought it was wrong. And I think they're right, because these things do create dangerous lines in democracies and dangerous problems that we all need to see, regardless of whether it's a moral thing to do in the first place. Last night, we focused on financial inclusion. This morning, you heard about diversity and access to capital, about diversity in the city and climate justice. This afternoon, you're going to hear about transgender rights, about the intersection of race and class, and about a topic that's still spoken in somewhat hushed tones in the city, menopause. You have a CEO, a supermum, and a Hollywood producer to come, so I'm not going to get in the way. I hope you have a very good afternoon, and I'll be listening to part of it. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Bloomberg's Samuel Etienne.
Hello, good afternoon. So we've got a very short video to play for you just for a minute before we get into things. So enjoy this short video, and I'll be back with you shortly. Beautiful. So our next guest is an award-winning author, speaker, advocate for music education, especially in state schools, and also happens to be the mother of some rather special children. Kadiatu Kane-Mason is a former lecturer in English at the University of Birmingham. Her memoir, House of Music, Raising the Kane-Masons, in my hand here, won the Royal Philharmonic Society's Storytelling Award and Indie Book Awards Prize for Non-Fiction. She's a rather special mum, as you'll soon learn, and also, as a former academic, has some really interesting views on not only music education, but inclusivity and diversity in wider society. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Kadiatu Kane-Mason. Welcome, welcome. How are you?
Very good, yes.
I'm very glad you made it down.
Yes.
We spoke yesterday about logistics and sort of just what it takes in terms of running your household, essentially. But we're also very glad that you made it in terms of logistics, given the train situation.
Yes.
So I know you have to shoot off afterwards, so thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
We have roughly 20 minutes, and we're going to touch upon 3 key topics, all right? So the first one is overcoming barriers to entry. The second, what individuals and organizations can do to be more inclusive. And the third, nurturing creativity. What is it? How do you do it? How do you get the best out of people? I should also say, myself, I'm Samuel Etienne. I'm a reporter and producer for Bloomberg News here in London. And I'm really pleased to be discussing this with you here today. All right, so let's get straight into it. We're talking about overcoming barriers to entry. Now, your family, a very good-looking family at that, have overcome some massive barriers, not only in terms of race and sort of being a black and mixed race family in perhaps very traditional and white institutions, but also the financial aspect of things. And when you look at sort of trying to navigate and enter new spaces, it can often be very costly, especially with regard to classical music. Could you perhaps just discuss how you overcame some financial barriers that has enabled all of your children to be taking up music to such a high level?
I think that's probably why classical music is seen to be such an exclusive area, because the instruments are expensive, the lessons are expensive, the travel to lessons are expensive, the travel to concerts and competitions, getting into concerts are expensive, the whole gamut. So when we went into, we have 7 children, but of course we started with the one. And she was desperate to have lessons. So we thought, okay, that's fine. But unfortunately, if you give something to one child, you've got to give to all 7. And I think what parents, I think a good tip for parents is don't think about the whole thing at once. Just do it, take one day at a time, because if you do, you'll realise you can't afford it.
Okay. I hope you wrote that down. Don't take it all at once, all right? And that's really helpful. So that's sort of looking at finances. But then if we look at sort of the aspect of race, how you found navigating these very different spaces to the space in which you grew up. And perhaps for the audience here, you could sort of share some insight on your upbringing, just in case they're not aware of it, as it's discussed in this very great book that you can get from all good retailers.
Thank you. Yeah, because I think when people talk about access to classical music, as an example, the first thing to be mentioned is finance, which is a huge barrier, but it's not just finance. There's a huge cultural barrier as well. I know when the children were growing up and they were starting to play their instruments, we had so many people coming up to us and saying, why are you pushing, especially our boys, into an area where they're only going to fail, into an area where they don't belong, and we were accused of setting them up for failure. And I think that's a very difficult barrier to get through. And really, if there's a matter of self-confidence as well. Because I think every time we went into a concert, we were the only black people in the audience. There were no black musicians on stage. And so it seemed to be true that, in fact, this wasn't a space we belonged to. Yeah. And I was born in Sierra Leone, to an African father, Sierra Leonean father, and a Welsh mother. So already there was a huge barrier that had been overcome with my parents. And I think that probably gave me the strength to think, do you know what? You don't listen to what other people say. You can go anywhere you want. You can, I suppose, go against people's expectations. And my husband was the son of immigrant Antiguan parents who had to overcome going to try and buy a house, and at the doorstep the owners wouldn't let them over the doorstep and pretended the house was sold, and all those issues that they had to go through in the 50s and 60s. So I think both of us were brought up with that sense of defiance, which was very helpful, I think.
And would you say that you were very decisive in passing that on to your children, or they just picked up on that through their parents?
I think it's interesting, and I don't know if this is a gender divide, but my husband was always completely defiant. He never took no for an answer. He wasn't interested. Whereas I wanted to gather my children to me and protect them because I knew what the world was like. But I think between the two of us, we managed to forge a way through.
I like that. I really like the fact that you touch upon your upbringing in Sierra Leone. And you're from quite a large family. If you could perhaps let us know about your family in Sierra Leone.
It's probably an understatement. So my father was one of 45 children. His father had 21 wives and his mother had 10 children. So I was brought up with lots and lots of cousins and aunties and uncles. So when we came to the UK, a big family was what I was used to. My husband's mother is one of 12. His father's one of 7. So he grew up with lots of cousins. So big family was what we understood, I suppose.
Yeah. What's 7 children, right?
Nothing.
That's incredible. And with regards sort of raising children, we've spoken at length about the logistics involved. I imagine you run your household like a military operation, and perhaps you could just give us some insight into what it took to get the children to practice, to concerts. Yeah. I mean, you live in Nottingham. A lot of this is in London. Yeah. What time would you have to leave in the morning, for example? What would you have to do to get them all to their various practices and recitals?
Yes, so we made the very brave step of allowing them, because Isata, our eldest, decided she wanted to study at the Junior Royal Academy of Music in London, which we thought, well, it's probably not going to happen because you have to have an audition. It's very difficult to get in. And then she got in. So eventually...
Very quickly, how old was she when she said that she wanted to do this?
She was 9 years old. And then we ended up at the height, I think, taking 5 children every Saturday to the Royal Academy, and then the other 2 are going there now. But yes, so it was a 6 a.m. train from Nottingham to London, and a whole day in London, and then back about 8:30 at night. But just the logistics of getting all those children into the car, to the train station, to London. But I think in some ways we were lucky having 7 children, because you have to, as parents, have a sense of routine. Otherwise you cannot survive bringing up that many children in a sane manner. So the practice was part of that routine. They'd come home from school, they would eat, they would do their homework, they would practice. And because they saw all their brothers and sisters doing the same thing, I think that made it easier in a way.
Wow. Incredible. I'm not sure how you've done it. Still, I've read about it. I see you here, but I'm still not sure how you've done it. It's really incredible. And so we've spoken about sort of financial aspect, also the racial aspect of overcoming barriers, as well as the logistics. But with regard yourself as a parent, I mean, you were a great academic. Perhaps you lost part of that identity in raising these 7 children. So was there a barrier to overcome there as well?
I think that's incredibly difficult for mothers. I do sympathise hugely, because I had a career. I thought that I wasn't really going to have children. I was going to have an amazing career, and even if I had children, it wasn't going to affect it. That's not the reality, I think, of life in the UK. It's very difficult to afford childcare for a start. So when I stopped work, I thought it was temporary, and I thought I would just go back to my career. But 2 things happened. I think one is circumstance and practicality. It was very difficult for me to go back. And another was a huge loss of self-confidence. I think you take on the identity of a mother, which is not a positive identity, I think. And you stop thinking of yourself as an independent person who can go to work and be articulate. I mean, I was surrounded by children all day, talking children's language, and I thought, how on earth would I, take off these clothes which are covered in baby vomit or whatever and walk out into the world. I remember talking to a colleague of mine who had children, and she said she used to feel that she was coming to work with an apron on, because that's very, very much, I suppose, take on that identity internally. Yeah. So yes, that was a huge sacrifice, actually.
Wow. It's really interesting to hear you say that. You touched upon confidence there. You mentioned self-confidence. You also mentioned self-confidence earlier with regard to children and them sort of pursuing their talents. Was that something that you inculcated into your children? And perhaps, if you did, how?
I found that very difficult, because I think when we took them to music competitions or we took them to the Royal Academy, Isata, when she arrived at the Royal Academy, was the only black child in that institution. Things have changed a bit since then, but she was the only one. And it was very difficult to know what to do. So what I did was not to mention it, not to go on about it. Obviously she noticed, but to act as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Obviously you can't do that all the time, because things are going to happen. And I think my husband did it by just total defiance. He wasn't interested in it being an unusual thing. And you just, as I said, take it day by day.
Like that. There's a lesson in that for everyone here when you're navigating new areas or going into a new space. Maybe not fake it till you make it, but just take it day by day. But your husband was very defiant. Yeah. He wasn't fake it. He was actually doing that. I'd like to touch upon our second topic now. And that's what individuals and organisations can do to be more inclusive. You've spoken at length and also written about inclusivity. Are there any sort of key takeaways, especially for our audience here, largely a corporate audience, that they can take away and apply tomorrow to try and be a bit more inclusive with regard their organisation, but also how they interact with other people?
I think this is actually a really difficult area, and it has so many different angles. If I could start with what a lot of orchestras are doing. When you audition for an orchestra, you go up in front of a panel and you play. And what they were finding was however much they tried, they were not getting orchestras more diverse. So what they introduced was blind auditions. So everybody went behind a screen and auditioned, and immediately the numbers of black and diverse people shot up. And so I think what it shows is that there is a kind of unconscious bias, obviously, that goes on. So they would see a black person playing an instrument and immediately think, well, that person can't be as good as a white person playing an instrument. So that's one approach. Another approach I think that happens in companies is blind applications, where you don't see the name, because the name, of course, is immediately a marker. And I think it's the culture of institutions, because there is a way in which, if you enter, for example, a lot of classical music institutions, there's a very particular culture that goes with that. Yeah. You have to talk in a certain way, behave in a certain way, and that needs to be worked on as well. So it's a constant dialogue, I think. And having people in high places in companies is extremely important, because that immediately changes what you do as a company.
Yeah, having people bought into those suggestions that you mentioned. That's really, really helpful, and some key takeaways for everyone here, I think. Very conscious of the time, and I'd like to ask for us to quickly touch upon nurturing creativity. Yeah. It's very difficult to be creative in some of these careers in the city. Also, we spoke about this yesterday on Zoom. People often throw creativity to the side. Then they reach a certain age, especially after raising children. They think, I used to play in a band, or I used to like motorbikes, so I'm going to get a Ducati now. And I'm like, 60 years old on my superbike. What am I doing? How would you give, perhaps, let me phrase this correctly. How would you suggest people nurture creativity? Because you've done it so well with your family. What are some suggestions you could have for individuals in the audience to nurture creativity, be it art, music, or whatever they're interested into? What specifically have you done that you could advise others to do?
I think my bugbear is education. So I do find that state education has changed a lot so that you have the creative arts, so you have music, anything to do with the creative and performing arts is pushed aside, and it's all about learning facts, maths, English, and that's fantastic. But what I would say is there is not a gap between those things, and that what's happened with the syllabus, and I noticed it when my daughter was in sixth form, this is my fourth child, and she was doing English A-level, and she wrote what I thought was a fantastic essay on Romeo and Juliet. It was very textual, it was very imaginative. She got a really low mark for it. So I phoned the school because I was interested, why did she get a low mark? And the teacher said, I'm really sorry, but she didn't use any semicolons. And to me, that was a metaphor for a lot of things that are happening in education. I think you have to approach every subject creatively, which means thinking imaginatively, which means understanding things in a I suppose sideways way. And I don't think that you can just say, I'm a musician, I'm an artist, and then I'm someone who does maths and English. Yeah. Every subject is creative. So it does come from that educational level. And I think it's about thinking outside the box and talking, and it's in everything you do. It's not necessarily, I'm going to go out now and I don't know, make a piece of art and then go to work, and those two things are separate. Yeah. Because they're not.
And just very quickly and finally, what next for you and your family? What's next on the horizon?
We've got an incredibly busy concert schedule, that's the first thing. And as parents, it's choosing which child we're going to listen to tonight, because their concerts are always clashing. And constantly keeping up with it, because they are musicians, but they also feel that they have to be role models. They also feel that they have to inspire others coming up. So we all do all of those things all at the same time. And as I said, one day at a time, otherwise you would die of the stress.
Yeah. I can say that you don't look particularly stressed. You're very serene. And I think we can all say here, you've raised an incredible bunch of children, and we're all really excited to see what you all do next and support what you're doing. So thank you very much for joining us here today. Dr. Kadiyatu Kani-Mason, everyone.
Thank you.
That's us. Thank you.
Please welcome Maria Sjödin, Executive Director, Outright International, and Bloomberg's Rakshita Saluja.
Hello, I'm back. Hi, Maria. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So
Thank you for joining us today. I'll kick it off with the theme that we've been talking about all day. Something that's been dominating headlines here in the UK, globally, really, and that's the cost of living crisis. High inflation, soaring energy costs, high rental prices. Many in the LGBTQ community, Maria, are already at a financial disadvantage, especially trans people. What are you seeing in your work, and what are some of the implications to the trans community in this current economic climate that we're in?
I mean, just as you just said, like when you're already living on the margins, anything that hits everyone will disproportionately affect those people on the margin. And of course, I mean, there are many in the LGBTQ communities that are shut out from formal economies, for example. They don't have access to jobs. We saw this very prominently during the pandemic. We launched a research project and a fund that ended up supporting over 170,000 LGBTQ people globally. And many people didn't have the opportunity of working from home. They cannot go back to their original families because they may have been kicked out or not welcome. And so, of course, we expect to see this over this recession and financial hardship. And I think it's important to remember that it's not just it's not equal for everyone. If you are already shut out, then you will be disproportionately affected, most likely. And of course, that definitely applies to trans people who have faced even more barriers when it comes to the job market, for example. So it is definitely a very serious challenge.
Right. I just want to stay in the UK a little while longer. There is a potential for a new government to be formed in the next few days, weeks, months. What would you like to see on the agenda for the government, specifically for trans rights?
I mean, the UK, I think over the last few years have really stood out when it has come to a hostile climate for trans and non-binary people. It's very unfortunate. I mean, the UK has dropped in ILGA Europe's Rainbow Index. The UK was supposed to host a global conference. It was cancelled. And really, I think the reputation of the UK when it comes to trans rights has taken a very serious hit. And I would like for the UK government to really step up, to prioritize inclusion, to value trans and non-binary people, and ensure that legally and also in the rhetoric coming out of the government, that they promote inclusion and respect for trans and non-binary people.
Sure. The UK government, in fact, last year backtracked on conversion therapy, where they said that they wouldn't ban conversion therapy for transgender people. Can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, the harmful implications of conversion therapy, especially on trans youth?
Yeah, so Outright has actually done a lot of research globally around what we now call conversion practices, because no one should be fooled. There's nothing therapeutic about this. It's got nothing to do with actual therapy that, you provide therapy to people to help them. Conversion practices are really a way of trying to force change in people's sexual orientation or gender identity. And so legal bans are just one way and one avenue to curb these practices that unfortunately can create lasting harm in the people who are subject to them, whether they actually seek them out themselves or they most likely are forced to do so. And so the idea that, okay, maybe we'll have a ban on for conversion practices when it comes to sexual orientation, but yeah, when it comes to gender identity, no, that's too complicated or it's not important. I mean, that just sends so much the wrong message. No one should be forced to change and you can't change. I mean, you have the gender identity that you have, and you need to be able to express it. You need to be able to have it recognized. And so the idea that somehow we should allow people to try to change other people's gender identity, it's just wrong. And I mean, of course, there has not been a ban, and it seems like rumors have it that maybe there even won't be a ban. I really hope that the UK government rethinks this and moves forward on this, because conversion practices do not belong in society anywhere, and certainly not in the UK.
You mentioned rhetoric, and I just want to move to the US now, where we have seen a surge in anti-trans rhetoric and a surge in legislation as well. Bloomberg Equality ran an analysis of statewide bills that were put forth this year, and nearly 60% of them were specifically against transgender healthcare. What are the real-world ramifications of these bills?
So first of all, I think it's important to know that this isn't just the US, it's not just the UK. This is a global push against trans rights. And the real world ramifications, of course, is, you're telling people that you're literally telling people that their lives don't matter. That's the message that's being sent. And of course, the targeting of trans youth, I think it's important to know this isn't actually about protecting trans youth. This is because those who are pushing these bills have realized that there is something about, we all want to protect children, we want to protect youth, and so they have found a narrative, or they have established a narrative that is what they are doing. But they really are not. They're not, they're not trying to protect trans youth, or they are trying to attack all trans people, all non-binary people, anyone who falls outside of a rigid binary system. And that is what they're doing. But of course, in real life, it means that they are trying to take away healthcare decisions from individuals and their families, and saying, well, you can't have access to this. You can't have access to this healthcare, no matter how much you need it, no matter whether it's going to save your life or not, no matter whether it's going to give you a good life as an adult or not. We don't think that you should have access to this healthcare. It's not based on science. It's not based on, normally you wouldn't have legislation about particular kinds of healthcare that can be provided or not. This is ideological. It's not about protecting trans youth or anyone else.
And do you think that this targeting of trans people is actually succeeding in energizing the base?
Yes, unfortunately, it is. It's not just what I think. It's proven that it is working. And I mean, I'm not going to go through all the examples, but I mean, there's proof of surges in hateful rhetoric on social media. For example, we've seen this both from the US and from the UK. We've seen outright attacks on people using social media, but also taking that into real life. So surges in hate crimes. I mean, there's the UK trans support group Mermaids. They've had to limit their phone hotline because their staff is getting so harassed by people calling in. So, and I mean, we've seen that in the US as well with the organization, the Trevor Project has also been targeted by callers who are flooding these support services with messages. And I mean, what are you trying to do then? You're trying to limit access for people who are in crisis, who are reaching out for support to a nonprofit that's providing this help that people need, including preventing people from trying to kill themselves. And hateful people are flooding these services, making them more inaccessible. I mean, that is a real life problem and a horrible, horrible push to, as you said, like energize people. And I mean, what they do with their energy is just, it's hateful. And so it really does have real life consequences.
So should social media have more guardrails on the platforms that we're all on?
I definitely think that it's important that social media platforms do not allow this kind of excessive hate. And I mean, we see this is a global problem. And clearly the sort of the AI monitoring of hate is not enough. And I've heard from so many people who have reported really significant levels of hate, and they're not being heard. It's very difficult to get materials taken down or taken off these platforms. And unfortunately, of course, I mean, the side that are spewing this hate, they are using the same platforms to organize and coordinate hate attacks.
Yeah. Public opinion, though, I'm going to cite a Pew study that was done recently, I think in May this year, that said 64% of respondents said they favored protecting transgender people from discrimination in jobs, in housing, and in most other settings. However, 50% of those same respondents said that they favor laws that require trans people to play on sports teams that match the gender that's on their birth certificate. What is your organization and organizations like yours doing to shift public opinion?
I mean, I think shifting public opinion is critical. And I mean, we've known for a long time that when you know someone who is LGBTIQ, you have more tolerance and acceptance. And so I think that the visibility is a critical piece, because maybe not everyone has a neighbor that they know, or a friend that they know, or a coworker that they know. So having visibility through media, and also, of course, companies, making their colleagues visible, I think those are some of the critical elements when it comes to shifting this narrative. I also think that, I mean, it's important, and I'm not sure if everyone who has responded in the survey sort of understand the consequence. I feel like a lot of the discussions around sport, it really has been like, oh, how do we exclude people? How do we exclude people? Like, it really should be about how can we make sports as inclusive as possible. And I think that it's critical to shift those narratives because I mean, when it comes down to it, don't we all want to live in a society that is inclusive? And how can we make it so? And I mean, I think it's a responsibility of everyone, including governments, including nonprofits like Outright and many others. And it really is the charge to all of us to promote inclusion.
You sort of touched upon the theme of the day, which is building a fair future. What role do you think business and business leaders have in being more inclusive to transgender people or employees?
I really think that businesses have a critical role to play. And I think this is something that, I mean, I'm from Sweden originally. I saw sort of Swedish laws change, and didn't initially, personally, I wasn't sure, like, do businesses have a role? Isn't it like legislation that should fix everything? And of course, with more experience and seeing the context in different countries, I've come to realize that actually, no, it is not. You can't wait for legislation to fix everything. And you have too many situations where legislators are not willing to do something that they feel is risky for them. Businesses speaking out and living their values, I think, is critical. It contributes to visibility. It allows people to not be discriminated, at least at work. And I think that businesses can make this visible and also show that there are some. You'll hear sort of fake arguments that somehow this will hurt businesses, or it will hurt other people or whatever. Inclusion doesn't hurt anyone. It just makes people feel included, makes them be part of the workforce, allows them to be themselves at work and contribute. And I really think that businesses can be more vocal around this, and they can create this visibility that is sorely needed. Not saying that, you should never force anyone to be out if they don't want to be out, but you should create a situation where everyone who wants to can be out. And you should make sure that that does not hurt people's careers. You should use that in your publicity. You should be visible, and I think that really is an important piece that businesses can take on.
Sure. We're running out of time, but I have time for one last question, which is you had a global organization. Are you seeing any bright spots or policies right now that give you hope?
I mean, I think that there are always some bright spots, and that's the thing. It's like nothing is linear. So progress or pushback is never linear. There are many places where we see pushback, but we also see progress. And I think that a lot of that progress comes from the visibility and organizing of trans and LGBTIQ communities themselves, making ourselves more visible, pushing lawmakers, pushing policymakers, pushing businesses to acknowledge that we exist and we should have the same rights, and we should be included, because otherwise we can't create a fair society. And I think that is always what I go to for hope, is seeing how we self-organize and put ourselves out there and make ourselves more visible, and somehow we do get society to move. Overall, I'm optimistic.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please welcome to the stage Naza Alakija, founder and CEO, Sage Foundation, and Bloomberg's Mark Miller.
Hello, everyone. Naza, thank you so much for joining us today here at the Equality Summit at Bloomberg. We wanted to discuss what's happening in Iran, which everyone obviously is aware of, but we wanted to look at it through the lens of women and girls and what that means, what's happening there, what does it mean for them. First, let me just do a little bit of biography of Naza. She and her mom left Iran in 1998?
Correct.
Yeah, when you were 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And you haven't been back?
Unfortunately not, no.
Right, and probably cannot return at this point.
For sure, no.
Why did you leave? Why did you and your mom leave?
You know, it was, what happened after the revolution, it was in small incremental changes that happened quickly, but quite silently. And you started to see the changes unfold as time went past. So by 98, I think, you know, our family had really, we'd given up hope on what the government was going to do for the country, do for the people, and I think what we are seeing today is a reflection of that.
Right, right. So today, as the announcer said, you're the founder and CEO of the Sage Foundation. Mm-hmm. Explain what that is.
So we're a small organization, and we focus on funding and supporting grassroots organizations on the ground in the Middle East and Africa. And you know, one of the countries that I've least been able to operate in is Iran, because of logistical and, you know, sanctions and all of that. But yeah, it's an organization that predominantly focuses on development around 3 pillars, which is climate resiliency, women and girls empowerment, and education.
Right, right. So let's talk about the current situation now in Iran. So Jina Mahsa Amini was a Kurdish Iranian woman who was arrested, I believe, in Tehran by the so-called morality police because of improper hijab. First of all, explain about her name, which I found fascinating. We were talking off stage because typically she's referred to as Mahsa Amini, mm-hmm. but her first name really is Jina, right?
Yeah.
Correct?
So the Islamic Republic forbids the Kurdish community from speaking their own language or doing anything that's cultural to the Kurdish people, or even have Kurdish names, which is why she needs an Iranian name on her passport, which is Mahsa, but her real name is actually Jina.
Right. So we start from that point, and then she's arrested. The Iranian government says that they didn't harm her, but she died in custody, and her family, I think it's fair to say, suspects that, you know, she died as a result of the treatment she received while in custody.
Yes.
That launched the protests that we're seeing today. One of the most striking things about the protests, I think, is, and so far at least 215 protesters have been killed, including 27 children, thousands arrested. These protests are across the country. And one of the things that I found really striking is that it is really women and girls who are leading these protests at this point. Why do you think that is?
It's a fight for their freedom, for their ability to be able to choose, for their ability to be able to make certain decisions about their autonomy, for them to experience, for them to be free.
Right. And does the fact that they're this generation, does that make a difference? Are they approaching this differently than older women, for example, who have lived with the regime longer, you know, haven't had access to social media? Is there a generational issue here?
No, I think this protest is actually quite the contrary. It is transcended ethnic and gendered lines and religious lines in so many respects. It is an entire nation coming together and protesting against the Islamic Republic.
Right. Iranian women are quite well educated, but they only constitute about 16 to 17% of the workforce. The impact of COVID was, as it was for women, working women all across the world, quite severe in Iran as well. We know the economic situation there is in pretty dire straits, partly because of US and European sanctions. But speak to why, and I should say Naza is in daily contact with people on the ground in Iran, tracking what's happening. But speak to why the challenge that women in Iran face to have autonomy, to work, to do what they want.
Look, I mean, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want autonomy? Why wouldn't you want to be able to make your own decisions? I mean, you know, in Iran, by law, a woman is worth half a man. Let that resonate. We are worth half a man. So that immediately creates a systemic issue.
Right.
And, you know, for example, as a woman, you mentioned educated woman. You go to university, you graduate, you are then put in an environment where these institutionalized patriarchal systems have no space for you. And not only that, you know, it leaks into different parts of society. So the people that are reviewing your university applications, the people that are granting you the jobs, are subconsciously or consciously biased towards you because you're a woman.
Right.
And what the Islamic Republic has failed, and it's the government, what they have failed to understand is by keeping women out of the workforce, you've had a detrimental effect on your economy. By keeping women out of the workforce, you've got an unequal society where gender-based violence is the norm. And you know, if they only ever integrated women equally, or at least in greater numbers, we would have had societal well-being, we would have had diversity, we would have had greater innovation, but that hasn't been the case.
Well, as you say, it's sort of institutionalized, so there doesn't seem much of a chance to create that kind of situation in Iran. Do you think that these protests lead to any reforms or improvement?
I mean, reforms within the Islamic Republic is very rare, specifically because the supreme leader always refers to Gorbachev and the Soviet Union and how his reforms essentially led to the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right.
So I don't see a choice in, I don't see much reforming with the current regime.
Right. A couple of other statistics that I found resonant that I wanted to share. So the World Economic Forum in their 2022 Global Gender Gap Report has Iran among the bottom 5 countries, actually 143 of 146, for gender equality, including equality in the workforce. It just seems extremely difficult for the idea that women are going to be welcomed in any real setting. That does not seem like it's on the horizon, even with these protests.
I am having a difficult time seeing that happen with the current regime in power.
We spoke earlier about the number of people, including women, who have multiple degrees, but there are no jobs, certainly for women, but also in some cases for men. And you made an interesting point. I said the economy is suffering to some great degree because of U.S. sanctions and European sanctions. But you had an interesting point about choices made by the regime.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the sanctions have had considerable harm on the Iranian economy. There's no doubt about that. Inflation's at an all-time high. Our currency's devalued by 70-80%, and it has had an impact. However, I want to think about the sanctions in a different context. If you are, as a leader, or as people running the country, if you have a responsibility towards the people, how are you investing the very little resources and tools at your disposal in investing in external forces within the region that are destabilizing the entire Middle East? So they're not even, it's not like they're even, with the limited sanctions, they're pouring that money back into our economy. They're not. And this is why the average civilian is suffering in Iran.
One of our audience members asked a question which I think flows naturally from this, which is, what do these protests in Iran mean for women in the Middle East more broadly? How significant are these protests for the region?
I think this movement has actually transcended the Middle East. I think women's rights, be it whether you're an American woman, where your rights to an abortion has been revoked, or whether you're in Afghanistan, whether your rights to education has been revoked, or whether you're an Iranian woman. I think these protests has what it's done is it's beautifully unified women across different generations, across different ethnicities. And it has had a ripple effect. So I don't think this is just a movement for women in Iran. It's a movement for women all over the world, because in one way or another, in different ways, our rights are being taken away from us.
Right. One of the, I think, one of the ways in which the regime is trying to keep a lid on this is and I've been reading more about this, are raids on schools throughout the region, girls' schools, for example. I was just reading in The Guardian a case of a 16-year-old schoolgirl who was beaten along with her classmates when the security forces raided the school and demanded that they sing an anthem to the supreme leader, which they refused to do, and the result was beatings and large arrests. Are you surprised that the courage of these young women to defy these authority figures?
No, I'm not. We always talk about culturally in Iran how powerful Iranian women are, and how we were allowed, for lack of a better word. But at this time around, I think they have reached their peak, from whether you're 70 years old or whether you're 16 years old. But I think the important thing to consider here is that, as a foreigner, if you're listening to this story, as Iranians, we've normalized this behavior. We see this day in, day out. So as this has started to unfold, and many of my counterparts have reached out to me, we've discussed how messed up is it that we really think this sort of behavior is okay or is normal, this sort of treatment of human beings. The government is acting with complete impunity, no accountability. These are people's children. These are people's sisters, wives.
Right. So it's just really hard to see how this ends, but there does appear to be no end in sight to the protests, which is another thing I think is quite striking, that these have spread quickly across the entire country, and they continue. And you do wonder how far will the regime go to shut them down. We like to end our sessions often here at the Equality Summit with a call to action, something that people in the audience, people watching online, can do to try to make some improvement. What would be your call to action to this audience?
Going back to what we were just saying, accountability. There's a petition that's been launched by Amnesty International that's due to be put forth to the UN to develop an accountability mechanism for the Iranian government and their actions right now. So signing that petition would be one of those things. The other thing is visibility. People are dying every single day in the streets. They go out the house, they don't know if they're coming back. They're getting murdered on the streets, they're getting raped, they're getting kidnapped. Please keep sharing our stories. Please keep covering this. And this really goes out to the wider media, because we really need coverage of this. And for the first time as Iranian women, we actually feel like we're being heard.
Naza, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome Bloomberg's Paula Fry.
Thank you. My name is Paula Fry, and I run one of our sales businesses here at Bloomberg in electronic trading. And it's a pleasure to come and moderate this panel for you today on menopause in the city. Really important subject for us to talk about. So why am I here? Well, I've spent the last 4 years campaigning fiercely to have menopause discussed in the workplace. Really important subject. I've been in financial markets for 30 years, 15 years as a trader and 15 years in sales. And it was in my mid-40s that I started to really struggle with brain fog. And I couldn't remember, firstly, birthdays and events and, you know, the odd presentation I was going to have to do. But then I really started to struggle when I was talking to my clients. And that's huge if you work in a business like Bloomberg where you're trying to, you know, learn lots of different things. So here today, we're going to be talking about why we should care. And also, you know, women are really being unheard in the workforce when it comes to menopause. A recent Foresight Society study said that 1 in 10 women are leaving their jobs due to the symptoms of menopause, and that 77% of women have 1 or more severe symptoms. And quite frankly, it can be really debilitating. I was very fortunate earlier in the year to take part in a documentary with Davina McCall for Channel 4 that's had over 5 million views already. And we're going to show you a short clip of that now before we bring our panel on.
That was the case with Paula Fry, who put all she had into her career in the city. You came from quite humble beginnings, and you've really worked your way from the bottom to the absolute top. How did the menopause impact your work?
My symptoms I can pin back to when I was about 43. I went to a big tech firm, had a lot to learn, great job, and I couldn't remember what I was doing.
Did you know what it was?
No, I thought I had early onset dementia.
I did too.
So I spent a lot of time really worrying it and masking it. I had heavy bleeding, quite a bit of pain every month. I used to have 3 pairs of pants on. I've been in meetings where I might be the only woman in a room full of 10 men. And I've got to stand up and maybe finish a pitch and shake hands with a lot of people, and I'm grimacing inside because I'm thinking, oh God.
Check the chair, check the chair.
Check the chair, yeah. Can I shuffle out backwards?
How far is the loo?
And I've gone into Marks and Spencer's and bought pants, trousers, and, you know, the whole kit and caboodle.
Did you share with anybody ever at work how you felt?
No, never once.
In workplaces.
Thank you, and I'd love to welcome on stage Lee Chambers, Saskia Gravel, and Danny Harmer. If you can give them a round of applause. Do you know when that clip was first played, somebody said to me, I don't think that could possibly be true. And they were kind of implying that I wouldn't normally shop in Marks and Spencer. so that it was actually true because it was the nearest shop I could get to.
Luckily, they sell them in packs of 3 as well. So it's
exactly. So I would love to just quickly introduce you to our panel. So we've got Lee Chambers here, who is a wellness consultant. You're also a menopause ally and a gender equity advocate. And I could go on, Lee, but we've run on a bit of a time thing here. Saskia is the co-founder of Hilda, a breakthrough wellness brand for midlife women. So welcome, Saskia.
Thank you.
And we've got the wonderful Danny Harmer, who is the Chief People Officer at Aviva, where she leads their people and their culture strategy. So we are going to have some polling questions, so please do get your phones ready if you would like to take part. We hope you would. Danny, if I kind of come to you first.
Yeah.
Menopause is such a buzzword, and it's almost, well, I feel anyway, it's almost like fashionable now, whereas when I was banging on about it a few years ago, it certainly wasn't. How do you think businesses build supporting women going through menopause into their DNA? What can organisations here learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like most other inclusion agendas, which is get allies. Lee, round of applause, thank you. Educate. So, Saskia, your business, absolutely fantastic. And then you just got to break the taboo. So, I know you say it's fashionable and talking about it. I mean, I went to an event a few years ago on menopause. We were talking about the fact that people are so uncomfortable with the word and the connotation because it's about age, it's about bleeding, it's about not bleeding, it's only about women, that they said you have to say menopause 10 times a day in order to get comfortable with it, especially men in the room.
You dropped the M-bomb.
Yes. So 10 times a day, just repeat to myself, menopause, menopause, menopause. We've just got to get comfortable with it and say that support matters and that people can talk about it and create safe spaces for colleagues to share their experiences and help each other.
So I suppose maybe this is a good time for a poll. If I dare, if you're going through perimenopause or menopause at the moment, would you feel comfortable to talk to your boss about it? So if you can answer that for us, yes or no. And we're gonna do 2 polls here as well. So that's sort of if you're going through those. You can answer it if you want, fellas. Okay, so, I mean, reasonably split there. I mean, look, and maybe that's because of the, maybe our audience in the room. And then the second thing, I'll just give that for a second. Right, okay. So I would say pretty split. I would say I was probably more thinking it would be more erred on the no side. But if we are flipping that, if you're not, you're not going through menopause, but would you be comfortable? And I think this maybe applies to more people in the room. People talking to you, like your staff coming to talk to you about what they are going through. So would you be able to conduct a conversation? Would be comfortable to talk about it? So let's see what everyone thinks about that. And by the way, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just getting your opinions. Okay, again, flipped probably what I would think. And Lee's nodding with me because I'm going to come to you next to talk about how we get comfortable with the uncomfortable. How, because this is difficult for a guy like you and I met at a breakfast and I made a beeline for you because sort of stood out, funnily enough, at a menopause breakfast. Yeah. So I zoomed over to you to say, what are you doing here?
Yeah, and I think that from my perspective, obviously, a big part of men starting to get comfortable with the conversation is the acceptance that it directly impacts 51% of the population, but it indirectly impacts everybody. And whether that's in the workplace, whether that's at home, whether that's with family, friends, colleagues, there's always someone within your circle who is probably going through significant challenges with the symptoms at this moment in time. And obviously for men, they don't have a representative aspect, but men do have hormones as well. And I think that so often for men, it's actually starting to become a little bit more conscious of what people are going through around them. An opportunity to learn and educate themselves and not always expect women to be the ones educating them. To really stop looking at it as this woman's issue. It kind of intersects with a lot of other challenges, quite often around women, suffering ageism and the invisibility that it intersects with, usually at the age around perimenopause. So from that male perspective, there's numerous reasons, whether you want to become a better leader, a better husband, whether you want to actually start to think about how you can support the people around you. It's all part of that wider agenda about starting to become more self-aware of the things that other people might be going through. And even though men don't have a direct context, there is a lot of considerations that they need to start to think about, especially given, women in the workplace are incredibly talented, highly competent, and quite often businesses are losing them because of a lack of support. And from the many women that I've spoken to over the years, They don't want massive systemic change. They don't want spotlighting. What they want is a little bit of support, a little bit of compassion, and a few minor things adjusting to make their working and everyday lives better. And men can play a significant part in that.
And can I just say, I think it's really important as well to remember that women now with life expectancy spend more of their life menopausal than they do reproductively.
Yeah, correct.
And the support for women in the workplace around being reproductive is brilliant in most organisations, and actually for men as well. But the sort of, post that, it just, in most places drops off a cliff.
Totally, and we've, we look at, in lots of my younger career, the whole thing around returning after maternity and making sure we support people. But I suppose for that, there's a lot of talk around what policies maybe should look like. I mean, do you have a policy at Aviva?
We have policies to support people for who need leave. I think what we have in Aviva that's most important actually is back to what we talked about at the beginning. So we offer support through an app called Peppy, which gives kind of online support, but also one-to-one counselling, because I think the health service really struggles to support in this space. And certainly, my advice to girlfriends when they come to me and say, I've been to my GP and I haven't had much support is, okay, you need to go back and get really cross, because that's right, that's not okay. Tell them your hormones are, so I think the sort of education and support is really important. And actually, one of the things we did with Peppy is that we extended the service to partners, so that actually it's not just the individual, that as a partner you can understand what your female partner's going through. And then I think it's just talking about it to get rid of the stigma. So we have a menopause discussion group at work, and I attended and shared my story. I mean, I have to say, I sometimes feel like a bit of a fraud. I have been one of the women who is reasonably lucky, but I appreciate that lots of people aren't, and it's my responsibility to be an ally for people who have a really tough time with it.
I do have a tough time. Saskia, you and I have met quite a few times, and we're both quite big advocates of HRT. Because it is, quite frankly, if you get it right, it's wonderful. I feel 35 now, despite not looking it. But there's also, like, I suppose, the holistic view. It's not a magic bullet. What do you think? Women in, how do we power through and make sure we can still perform in midlife?
I think it's really important that we recognise that every single woman's menopause is different, and there is no one solution, and also that we mustn't be finger waggy about HRT or never drink again. Every woman will have her own approach to it. What's really key, and we've all touched on it, is education, so that women know exactly what's going on at this time of life, exactly how they can look after themselves a bit better. I mean, it is true, wine is not your friend once you hit perimenopause, sadly.
Still my friend.
It's still my friend.
Still one of my close friends.
It's not my friend.
It's my best mate.
It's not my friend at 3 a.m. when I wake up with hot legs and alkanoia. But it's about finding a solution that works for you, but also taking responsibility. And, we say this a lot to the women in our community. Know what you are wanting before you go to your GP, because your GP may not be great on this topic. So go having educated yourself, understand what all the symptoms are, understand what all the possible solutions are. Yes, HRT is one option. It will have to be prized out of my hands. I am never coming off it.
Ditto.
But not every woman can, and also not every woman chooses to. So I think it's understanding that health and well-being holistically are really, really important.
Because it's nutrition, isn't it? And it's sleep.
Nutrition is key, sleep, and that will help with sleep. Exercise is key. But it's almost an opportunity, I think, when you come into the perimenopause years to really do a little bit of an MOT on your lifestyle and your health and your, you've maybe been thinking about exercise for a long time. Now is the time to start. So I think we have to take responsibility as women going through this. It's not just about expecting everyone else to support us.
And it can last a long time, right? I mean, mine's lasted like 10 years.
All the symptoms, I mean, I don't know if everyone, like the definitions are, you know, menopause is just one moment in time. It's just 12 months since your last period. So you are perimenopausal, the storm before the calm, from average age is 45 in the UK. Average age of that menopause moment is 51. And then for some women, the symptoms carry on into their 60s and 70s.
Yes, exactly, which is why you can stay on it forever.
HRT forever.
We're getting it. I'm definitely. We've got a couple of questions that are coming in actually from our audience. So really, thank you for that. And I don't know who. I mean, I kind of feel, Danny, this is going to automatically come to you. But the biggest things that organisations can do. So we talked a bit about support, but I think it is support, but also probably training, right?
Yeah, I think. For leaders, I think they just need awareness. I mean, I would expect leaders on challenges for their employees, whether it's mental health, which can actually come with the menopause, or, you know, physical health issues, or just the menopause, or brain fog, or it's too hot in here for me. You know, can I have a fan at my desk? I would expect them, I think organisations need to equip leaders to kind of triage. Because what you don't want is a leader thinking, I'm a mental health advisor, I'm a menopause advisor. So there's something about having the infrastructure and the support available and making sure that leaders know where to point people, but that they go, thank you for telling me. You know, I want to help you. You know, how would you feel if a colleague came to you and said, I'm diabetic and therefore I need to have breaks in meetings, I need to keep an eye on my blood sugar, I need to drink plenty of fluid, I need to look after myself. You'd go, absolutely, I can support you. A woman comes to you and says, I'm menopausal, and you know, it's like, I think for lots of people it's scary, but it's like many things. As leaders, you have to remember it's much worse for the person who's telling you. We have given you people to look after. That comes with responsibility. Please use it wisely and be kind and supportive, and just listen, actually, and then go away and see what you can do to help.
It's the listen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's, I think, you know, women in perimenopause, I know I had crippling anxiety, you know, and like I said in the film, I thought I had early onset dementia. So obviously it does affect people's, my symptoms definitely were mostly mental health symptoms actually, rather than anything physical. So it's like to your point, it's not necessarily something you can see, is it?
No.
Another question that we've got from the audience, so to be able to talk about menopause, we have to get comfortable talking about ageing. I mean, that's a great one, so thank you for that. So what can companies do to tackle ageism in the workforce? So Lee, have you got any nuggets, and like anyone can jump in on this one?
Yeah, so I definitely think it's kind of looking at where, from a company's perspective, well-being and inclusion intersect. There's potential there to look at the considerations around the fact that, you know, within organisations there are, you know, ageist challenges, and it's not often looked at in the wider diversity, inclusion and equity agendas. Naturally, a wellbeing strategy, given that, you know, the menopause itself is guaranteed for a significant portion of the workforce to be impacted directly, it needs to be part of that wider strategy. But, you know, like Danny just alluded to, there also needs to be the space created for people to be listened to, for, you know, some removal of some of that judgment. And as well, to destigmatise it, it needs to become normalised in conversation. There needs to be more around it, both from a communication perspective, also the potential for training and support, but also from that, you know, that leadership perspective of modelling. And, you know, what I've found with the organisations that I've worked with is that case studies are really powerful when someone is willing to share their journey. It's very, very powerful for engaging men if there's a male case study who shares how they've potentially supported their partner or a colleague, and it really ignites curiosity in other men. But, you know, the wider piece around ageism in the workplace, we do need to look at that. It presents a whole set of challenges, and workplaces are losing the most experienced, the most capable, and often the most skilled people because they've not really put anything in place to look at the ageist challenges that their employees might be facing.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole be educated for kind of 16 to 20 years, work for 40 years, and then retire for 20 years isn't going to work.
Go on a cruise.
That is not going to work. So, you know, and there's this massive talent pool of really experienced people, as you say. I mean, I think certainly at Aviva, and I can take no credit for this because it was set up when I joined, our inclusion communities, we actually have one called Generations, which looks at age across the organisation. And I would really encourage, you know, other businesses to do the same, to not just think about inclusion in terms of gender, sexuality. That actually there are, so we have a carers community, and we have Generations. I would really encourage organisations to do that, because this sort of, you know, the stigma of the age, along with it just being females, is just not helpful.
Just one more thing though on the ageism piece. Can we educate every single photo editor at national newspapers that when they run a menopause story, not to run a picture of an exhausted woman?
There was crying on a bench. Was that the one
look
you
it up,
saw?
right? There was one this week in, I won't name names, but it begins with G and ends in Ardian. And it was a story on menopausal women, and it was a picture of a woman weeping on a park bench. I mean,
that was me.
Who has time? So I think there is an ageist attitude towards menopause, that it is, you know, you are past your sell-by date, you are, you know, done with life. It's simply not true. It's J-Lo at the Super Bowl, for heaven's sake. You know, that's the menopausal age woman. So get with the program.
52 and smashing it. Yeah. So right. And ageism actually is. So whoever put that question on, that was a great question, because we probably don't talk about that as much as we should, and it does sit in the same bracket, because I think lots of women have come to me and said to me over the years, I don't want to talk about my menopause to my boss, because then I'm saying I'm old, and therefore then I might lose my job. And no matter how much you reassure people to say, actually, you should really own it. Like,
also, sorry, I could bang on about this one for a while, but I think it's why our generation has such a responsibility to the next generation of women coming through, that we reinvent how this stage of life is viewed, so that they're not coming towards it thinking, oh God, you know, ageism and all of that will hit me at that point. We have to change the dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm getting lots of more questions as well from the audience, which is great. Any suggestions on how to bring up the menopause discussion with a boss? Anybody want to take that one from me?
Do you want me to have a go?
Go on.
You're the expert.
Well, I tend to be advising the leaders, but actually, I think, you know, if you go to somebody and say, I need your help, that is your start point. There are very few humans in this world who will not go, of course, how can I help you? And then you have the conversation. Just, I need your help. Because what you're going to say, actually, while it might be a real issue for you, is because you say that to your boss, they're like, uh-oh, incoming. Oh, okay, well, we can, you know, I can help you with this. So I would just start with, I need your help.
Yeah.
That's the best way to start that.
It does quite often put bosses into a support mindset. So they then start to think about, you know, potential ways that they could support you before you've even broached the topic. And it just, again, gives an opportunity for you to, you know, showcase a little bit of vulnerability at that point. And again, like Danny says, very few humans are going to repel you at that point.
I think it's the whole comfortable thing as well. The uncomfortable we were talking about is for, you know, some training for leaders, I suppose, at, you know, having them conversations. It's very tricky, I think, as well. And I don't know what anyone, and this is particularly really probably for you two ladies, if somebody, when you were going through your perimenopause, and maybe before you maybe identified with it, if somebody had said to you, oh, you know, you're a bit angry. I was very angry. Like, are you going through perimenopause? Would you, I mean, I potentially might have hit somebody in the face.
I think I would have, I mean, possibly.
So you know, maybe we're sometimes part of the problem as well.
Well, I think that's a key point, because I had terrible anxiety and I had no idea that it was perimenopause, despite the fact that I'd worked in women's publishing for 25 years. So actually, if I had had a boss who was educated in it and knew what was going on and recognised that me as a 49-year-old woman suddenly losing confidence and sobbing in the loo more times than, you know, is healthy, I would have actually loved it if they'd recognised that and been able to start that conversation. It would have saved me 2 years of thinking that I was terrible at my job.
It is a really, I mean, I might punch someone as well, same thing.
I didn't have the anger, I had the weeping and the daily feelings of doom.
But it's that, you know, it's that thing of hormones and the female, that if someone had asked you 20 years ago if you were premenstrual, you probably would have thought that was pretty invasive, right, and inappropriate as a question. I think certainly what I would have been comfortable with is, are you okay you don't seem yourself?
Oh.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, which is a really easy way to open that conversation, isn't it? Rather than actually, you know, worry that you're upsetting somebody by, you know, and it's a shame that also that women still think that maybe being labelled as perimenopausal is not a good thing.
Yeah, it's a real challenge because you get different perspectives on being willing to disclose to certain people based on prior interactions. And again, we need to normalise it so it's easier to disclose, but at the same time appreciating that, you know, for some women they've been invalidated in the medical system, they've been invalidated at work, they spent, you know, potentially a lot of the careers climbing a lot of barriers and obstacles, and quite often, you know, the women that I meet, they've also got caring responsibilities upwards and downwards, and they're managing so many different aspects, and really they don't want to be judged at that point. They're already doing so much. It just comes down to, you know, like Danny said, instead of men sometimes going, oh, is it menopause, love? It's just a simple reality where actually you broach it with a bit of curiosity, a little bit of consideration to notice and sometimes be the one who can spot the early signals of someone who you work with on a regular basis, just changing slightly, and then just asking that question with curiosity, creating the space to listen and not jump into assumptions and judgments, because that can be as damaging as some of the symptoms itself.
And I suppose from a, you know, if you're in a relationship, you know, it's the same there, isn't it? Sometimes those you're closest to, and particularly if you're suffering from rage, I think like what I did, my poor husband went through a reasonable amount, but it's encouraging them to ask the right questions as well, isn't it, about what's maybe wrong. You know, we know that the biggest demographic of divorce actually is for women going through perimenopause, instigated, I suppose, by sometimes women going through perimenopause.
Well, we will never beat the taboo unless men feel comfortable being in on the conversation as well.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it has to be everyone talking about this.
Totally. And one of the last questions we've got from the audience is kind of talking about that, about having the broader conversation, but also bringing in, you know, periods and fertility and menopause in one thing. And, you know, because I suppose because we certainly, like you said, you know, certainly when I worked in a trading floor when I was in my 20s and 30s, you know, that would have been bandished around a bit if there was a bit of an angry woman. Some trader might have said, another trader, male trader, might have said, you know, she's on a period or words to that effect. I won't actually probably repeat what would have been said. That's the polite version. You know, that's not okay. It's not okay to say it. So how do we, I suppose, get rid of that stigma? Do we just need to talk more?
I think we need to talk more. I think also we just need to acknowledge that some women will be incredibly private about all of this. So there are some women listening to this going,
cringe.
I can imagine nothing worse than, you know, somebody
Every woman's different.
Yes,
Every
exactly. Which is so, are you okay? You know, you don't see, how can I support you? But know that the resource, the support is there, and there is no taboo. It's a conversation you can have, and you can ask for help.
So I think just to wrap up, thank you for so much interaction from the audience. Is there maybe one takeaway that we can give to our audience and our people watching on live today from, maybe if I start at you, Lee, just one little nugget you want to give everyone to take away?
Yeah, so it's about that kind of curious support, creating a space to listen and attaching it to well-being and inclusion, because it's important to be able to embed it within the workplace, normalise those conversations.
Saska?
Educate yourself, understand what's going on with your health, and then take the brakes off midlife, because it is a brilliant time of life. Don't let me.
And don't drink wine, you said.
Maybe don't drink wine.
Don't listen to her. Sorry, Danny.
Everything they said. So I'm going to add one on, which is if you are impacted by perimenopause, menopause, go and insist on the support that you need. Go and insist. Do not tolerate, well, you seem fine, take a herbal remedy. if HRT is for you, if you can take it, insist. You deserve and need the support. Do not be fobbed off.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Sharon White, Chairman, John Lewis Partnership.
Gosh, I wish I had been here for the entire session. So both don't drink wine, probably a bit too late, and don't worry if when you hit your perimenopause, if you're about to divorce your husband. So I can give my husband Robert some context for the last few years. Red wine's good. Okay, that's great. Tips are always good. It's fantastic to see everybody this afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. It's the first time I have been able to attend a Bloomberg Equality Summit, and given everything that's happening in the world, what a fantastic subject with obviously lots and lots of different dimensions that we're able to discuss and chew over, and hopefully some controversy in the room as well for this afternoon. I want to start off with a bit of a story. I had dinner about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was very lucky to sit next to somebody called Ashley. And Ashley is this very vibrant, very energetic, now professional journalist. And he was put into care when he was 3 years old. And I'm a mother of teenage boys, and so as I was listening to his story, trying to imagine what it must be like, preschool, toddler, you're just even starting to get a sense of self. You know, my earliest memories personally are when I was 3 years old. And he was basically sort of shuttled between homes throughout his life. He was suspended from school a number of times. He's got a great phrase that he was not a poor performer. He was an underachiever for his potential. And at a stage, kind of as a teenager, age 15, say, when, you know, it's the classic age when, you know, other kids are kind of figuring out how much money they need to buy the next pair of training shoes. He was trying to figure out how he was going to eat and how much money he was going to live on. And today, Ashley is a BBC News journalist. I don't know how many of you may have know who I'm talking about, but he's somebody who was part of the coverage for the Queen's funeral recently. He did one of the most extraordinary pieces after Grenfell when he was talking to survivors. And he was essentially almost talking as a sort of life survivor himself over those sort of tragic events in 2018. And what I loved about Ashley is he's in a kind of determined, bright as a button. And like so many kids who grew up in care, the sort of resilience, in a sense, more resilience than anybody in their 20s should have. And the difference why his story turned out to be as it was, and he went off to Cambridge to do history by coincidence at the same college I was at in the 1980s, is that somebody gave him a chance. And for him, it was a combination of family and a teacher who was very important. And some of you will also know an institution called the Sutton Trust, which does a sort of an incredible job in the UK in terms of finding, reaching out to talent, particularly those in disadvantaged communities, and really encourage them to see the potential that perhaps they don't see in themselves. And then at the BBC also saw talent, and he's a great talent, and he was successful in getting onto one of their access programs. And the reason why I want to talk about Ashley is because the fact that talent is universal and opportunity is not universal is something that should bother not just society, but that should bother businesses. So I'm chairman of the John Lewis Partnership. I don't know how many of you hopefully shop with us. John Lewis or Waitrose, short plug for the premium retailers in the country. But what many people don't know about the business, it's a very unusual business. And I often talk within the partnership about the absurd idealism of the partnership. So we're a commercial entity with a social purpose. We have a constitution, a bit like the Bible, a bit shorter, but a bit like the Bible, which essentially requires us not to make maximum profit, but to make enough profit to do good. And the founder, John Speedon Lewis, this is almost, a gazillion, 100 years ago, basically gave the company away to the employees, to the partners. And this is sort of thinking about the sort of post-war era, pre-beverage, if you know the sort of history of the UK, the welfare state. But essentially, he saw the partnership as an alternative to communism. That the partnership would provide such a generosity of benefits and support, and this is before the welfare state, that why would you want to become a communist after the war? And so the partnership provided healthcare before the National Health Service was founded, has still a great principle that you could have left school at 16 and work on the shop floor as shop assistant, and why shouldn't you have the benefits and the life of somebody who's a sort of professional member of the, professional middle class. And today we are giving real thought to what's the modern expression for the partnership. And our passion are young people like Ashley who have had an upbringing that has been marked by dislocation and a lack of love and a lack of affection, and where the state either isn't present or is present and doesn't do a good enough job. And some of you will know, it's easy to roll off statistics, some of you will know the statistics about young people from the care system, but it's not just statistics, it's numbers. A quarter of young people who've been in care and not in, less than a quarter of young people who've been in care are in education, in training, or in a job. Less than a quarter. Imagine that's your child, your brother, your sister, your nephew, your niece. If you're in care, you're more likely to be homeless than you are to go to university. Homeless than to go to university at a time when access to higher education has exploded in much of the West. So that sense of systematic inequality is, it's quite profoundly shocking. And so over the last 18 months, the partnership we're trying to do our best. We're not perfect, don't put ourselves up on the pedestal, but we are trying. And over the last 18 months, we have started to provide employment support, employment programs, working with lots of local authorities up and down the country for young people who are care experienced in some of our shops in Essex all the way through to some of our stores in Manchester. And we've brought together an advisory group of care experienced young people, but also experts in the sector to really help to kind of guide us as we start to find our feet in this profoundly important but also very complex area, and we don't want to get things wrong. And we would love other businesses to join us. So some of you will know Timpson's in the UK, which is a fantastic business, family roots, who have sort of become this premier employer for people who've left prisons, the criminal justice system. And my ambition is that the John Lewis Partnership becomes the employer of choice for young people who have come from the care system. And as well as a sort of business endeavour, I think there's also more that the government, and I kind of say that advisedly at the moment, but more that the government can do to step in and provide support, because for so many children, the government is family, the government is in loco parentis. And that's some of the basic building blocks, like a safe and stable home, like not being told at 15 you've only got 3 years before the care system leaves you, doing for children what one would hope and expect as a good parent oneself. And we think there needs to be more creative thinking. What difference would it make if all the unspent money from something called the apprenticeship levy in the UK, which is billions of pounds, what a difference it would make if that money was repurposed and spent on young people from the care system? Wouldn't it be fantastic if the 6% of young people who go into further education, wouldn't it be amazing if that were 16%, 26%, 96%, and that should be an ambition within all our reach. So we need to invest more. We need to invest more because it's the right thing to do for the young people themselves, but it's also the right thing to do for a civilised and decent society. And by investing in them, I think we invest in a better society for all of us. So thank you very much. And I think Ruth, who's looking very, the partnership colour is green, so I feel I should be wearing Ruth's colour today rather than...
I did not know that I was coming on.
Do you want to sit here?
Yes. It wasn't the
I kind
voice
of feel
God.
this is social distancing. Shall I come? Let me come to you. Well, holding on to my skirt.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ruth David. I'm Deputy London Bureau Chief. And I'm so excited to be here with Dame White. I've been reading
Sharon,
up.
because
Yes,
otherwise...
I asked her just before we went in, I said, do you prefer Sharon or Dame White? And she insisted Sharon. So that's a good start for equality.
Yes, the only person who calls me Dame is my 15-year-old who calls me Dame Shazimodo, and it's not good. Normally he's thinking something's dramatically gone wrong.
So, not a lot to talk about in the UK right now. Quiet days. But seriously, as the leader of a British institution almost that employs more than 80,000 people, and the futures of many of whom are at stake as we're looking at all that's going on, you know, when you see the fiscal and the political roller coaster of the last few weeks, what are you thinking and what does this mean for your business?
Oh, that's a big question. And some of you will know, in my previous life, I used to be in charge of the public finances at the Treasury, so I'm having it's been a very sort of peculiar few weeks. I guess a few things to say. So I left the public sector and joined the partnership in January 2020, which you may think has either been the best timing or the most inauspicious timing. So I had sort of 5 or 6 weeks in the business before COVID hit, and now a cost of living crisis, which for us is probably having a more profound impact even than COVID. And that's for a number of reasons. As I say, we're partnerships. We're a very unusual business. We employ more people than most of our competitors. Our pay and benefits package is greater than our competitors. So when margins start to decline, it hits us harder. Obviously, the last few weeks have been. I think that the term unprecedented has been. You sort of think it's overused, but I think it's unprecedented, and I think as a business, what you most want is stability and predictability as you plan for the year ahead and you plan your investments for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think certainly the statement yesterday starts to lay, I think, probably firmer foundations for more stability than perhaps the last few weeks have entertained.
I mean, given the government as an agent of bringing about equality, you refer to your time at the Treasury. When you see all that's happening, are you tempted to go back?
Oh my goodness, no. I'm not sure they'd have me back either. I sort of often describe myself as being, I'm a realistic optimist. I'm an optimist because I believe profoundly in the good of people and the good of society and the good of business, which is just a collection of people. But I'm also very realistic because the context in which we find ourselves, I mean, most people in the room are far too young, but this sort of takes me back to the 1970s and some of the implications of the oil price shock. We haven't had a sort of inflation-led recession for decades. So I'm optimistic that we will move through. I'm optimistic that the British people are basically sort of pragmatic realists who want good, decent public services, and want efficiency and value for money in how they in you know the money they give to the government for tax and the money they trust to the government to spend on their behalf. So I'm very optimistic, and how long it takes us to sort of get back into that place where there's less volatility, more certainty. I think, as I say, I think the last couple of days have been an important step in the right direction.
And speaking of money, how do you balance paying and treating your workers well, better than many in the industry, arguably, with the competition from the Aldis, Lidls, Tesco's of the world? And when you're saying we're not focused on bottom line, but now consumers, all the latest data is showing that they are focusing on bottom line and they are pulling back on, say, the slightly luxury purchases. How do you balance that?
So it's a great question, and we revamped the purpose of the partnership this year, which is now working in partnership for a happier world, balancing happier people, customers, our employees, partners, suppliers, happier business, i.e. the bottom line, and happier world, i.e. all the good stuff we want to do in society. And those are incredibly difficult trade-offs, and they are difficult trade-offs when you're making money, and they are even more difficult trade-offs at the moment when profits are very challenged. And I guess the way I would describe it is that we still need to make a profit because we're to do the things that we need to do to survive as a business. And I think what it means is that it's not that we shy away from some of those difficult decisions. We closed a third of our John Lewis stores, permanently closed a third of our John Lewis stores during COVID. Very regretfully, we've had to make a lot of redundancies over the last 2 or 3 years. But I think the way one does that, the conversations and the engagement we have, and we're also democracy, so we have elected councillors and representatives, so it's a very engaging discussion. And what paradoxically often happens in the partnership, because you're both an owner and an employee, often our partners are saying, well, Sharon, why aren't you going faster? Gosh, because we know the pound in our pocket's going less far. Actually, we should be making change even more quickly. So I'm not sanguine about it, because I think we will, over the next 6 to 12 months, be facing into yet more difficult challenges, because inflation is clearly with us for some time yet. So I would say it's as much the way we try to do the change as it is the fact of being absolved or somehow insulated from the realities of the market.
And you're open to the idea that there could be more stores to go, and there could be more of all of that coming as customers tighten their belts, I'm guessing.
I guess all I would say is that, the next year looks tricky. I suspect that, I don't know how many of you fixed your mortgages at 2% on a 2-year fix during the pandemic when stamp duty was energy. So, I mean, there's nobody. I mean, one's particularly focused on, as we are, people from care and people who are most vulnerable in society. But, you'd have to be a millionaire not to worry about an energy bill that's going to double, or, your food inflation's running at more than 12%, or your mortgage going up potentially £4,000. I mean, I'm very well paid, and I've told my kids we're not switching on the heating this year. So they put an extra jumper on, and we've now got blankets on all the sofas. And my younger son said, but Mummy, why have we not put the heating on? I said, well, cost has gone up double. Oh, I really get it, I'll put another sweater on. So I think it means that context means, I don't think any business can say, they're not going to have to face into some difficult decisions.
And you had months earlier spoken of the need for the government to come up with a cost of living aid package for families that are struggling with some of these very costs.
Yes.
How are those discussions going now, and what are you calling for the government to do? Because one would argue that now it's even more imperative.
Yeah, so this was in July when the Ofgem had announced the energy cap for October, which looked like at that stage it was going to be about £4,000. And I think partly with my old hat on being in government, I was just profoundly worried about the lack of decisive action on energy bills, given everything we've talked about, that everybody's affected. And actually, this was when, it's hard to believe, this is 3 chancellors ago. So this was still Rishi Sunak in July. And actually, I think it was very positive that the government responded. They also responded with their version of a windfall tax, which I think was called the energy levy. Obviously, now we're in a slightly different position. So the government, this Prime Minister, Chancellor but one.
This new Chancellor
has announced 6-month energy cap, which runs till April, and more targeted support from then. And I can understand it's the balance between ensuring that the financial markets don't feel that government borrowing is excessive and that there's a robust fiscal plan, but also with how we as a country ensure that people least able to pay get the support they need.
He also announced and did away with some of the tax breaks for retailers, right? I mean, there was all this talk about VAT relief. Does that make it even harder? And now are you entering a phase where you're saying, well, there's no way we can pay our workers a bonus this year?
I think there's always the sort of balance as a business, as a retailer, with, I guess, where the original fiscal package, the mini budget was, is if you look at the tax changes that affect business, and it was corporation tax as well as the reintroduction of duty-free shopping, if you balance that against the rise in interest rates that were the consequence of the mini budget, the rise in business rate and the rise in interest rates has a bigger impact on investment decisions than the reduction in taxation. So actually what's more important to us is less whether individual taxes go up or go down, it's whether the general environment for business is stable, less volatile, and less spiky in terms of interest rates, where you suddenly think you're going to invest in, I'm going to make this up, a store, and to borrow to do so, and suddenly it's uneconomic overnight because the rate at which you're borrowing is so much more expensive.
And one of the things that you have spoken about is also the need to encourage more workers to come back into the workforce, right? Especially the 1 million, mostly over 50s, that have left. How do you think the government and companies can do that? Because, of course, there's an impact there on wage inflation as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, this is a positive, really, from the pandemic, but I don't know how many of us, I don't know, just over a year ago, gosh, it's when furlough was ended, would have guessed that the impact was really, really tight unemployment rather than too many people chasing too few jobs. So furlough ended, and what's been fascinating is, and I'm sure you know, that 1 million people have stopped looking for work. Some people call it the great sort of resignation. I think it's the great life reappraisal, where I think lots of people have just decided that, other things that they want to do in their lives, and or more negatively because of ill health. So the labour market is much tighter. So regardless of anything else, there's just much more wage inflation. You've got more jobs than people. And so whether this is about what companies can do, and the partnership has always had quite flexible retirement, so you can retire at 65 and come back and maybe work a couple of days, 3 days a week. I think it's really about being conscious of there'll be some older workers who still want to have their hands in work, and I talk as somebody who's, I'm 55 myself, but actually different businesses don't necessarily make it very easy to work in a very flexible way.
One of the issues around workers is, do we get more immigrants in? Your parents, I understand, came to the UK as immigrants in the 1950s. Do you think the country today is more or less open to immigrants than it was when they came here?
Oh my gosh, yes.
And, you know, what would you like to see on that front? And I say this, I'm an immigrant, you're a child of immigrants.
Where's your heritage?
India.
India. So my parents are Windrush generation. So my mother came to the UK when she was 19, which makes me go, ouch, in 1961, and my dad came when he was about 26 or so in 1957, 58, and they met here. And I often say to my mum's now passed on, but my parents, the best thing they ever did for their children was to leave Jamaica, because we got to go to school. My mum didn't really go to school very in any consistent way. She gave up going to school when she was about 11, and maybe had 2 or 3 years of schooling in total. My dad left school when he was 15. So the very fact that I was able to go to school until I was 18, my brother similarly, was a profound miracle as compared to my parents' background. So I think immigration personally had a profound effect, and I think it promotes tolerance and cultural exchange and diversity and inclusion, as well as being important for the skills gaps and where the labour market is today.
Absolutely.
So tell me your story.
Well, I came here 10 years back. I thought I would be here for 2 years, and then I haven't left since.
Yeah.
I got married, had a baby, you know the drill.
You're here. Okay.
But I'd like to end on a slightly optimistic note. What can you share with us on the John Lewis Christmas ad? Is it going to be happy or more serious? What's the budget like?
It's not an optimistic note, because basically somebody will shoot me if I tell you. But watch this space. I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay. Well, I know that a lot of us look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
It was a pleasure.
You like the guns? You enjoy practicing with the men in the infantry? I see you flirting.
This is not allowed?
You know it is not.
Why not? The men who are soldiers have wives and children, but the Agojia cannot. How is that fair?
Were you this arrogant with your family? No wonder they gave you away.
It is you who is arrogant.
I am a general. I have earned it. You have earned nothing. I should put you out. I have watched soldiers die because they did not have discipline. Their easy life did not prepare them for...
I did not have an easy life.
As an Agojia.
I did not have an easy life. I want to be here with the others. I want to fight for my king.
Your tears mean nothing. To be a warrior, you must kill your tears. Go. Go.
Please welcome to the stage Maria Bello, actress, producer and writer, Sylvia Sjödin, author, and Bloomberg's Shartia Brantley.
All right. Sylvia, you can sit right there. All right, good to see everyone.
It's always so amazing to me, even to see that trailer, to see these women on the screen. We never thought we'd see it in Hollywood, and here we are. It's really powerful. I hope you've all seen the movie. If you haven't, go see it, please.
Definitely, and we'll talk more about it. So that was a clip from The Woman King, featuring Viola Davis as General Naniska and Tuso Mbedu as Nawi. As we know, the movie tells the story of the all-female Ogoji army in the African kingdom of Dahomey in the 18th and 19th centuries. I am just delighted to be here today with Maria Bello, who wrote the original story for The Woman King and received a writing and producing credit for the film, and noted historian and author Sylvia Sjödin. Welcome to both of you. Excited to have you both. We have limited time here, so I just want to dive right in and talk about representation. You just mentioned, Maria, just how special it is to see a moment like that in a film like The Woman King. And when we spoke last week, you said something that really stood out to me. You said this is the culmination of your life's work. Can you expand on that for us?
Every time you say that, I get a little choked up. Because the truth of the matter is, I worked at the Women's Law Project in Philadelphia when I was 20 years old, 1989. I was on my way to law school to study international women's rights. I was so obsessed with this idea that women were so marginalized at that point. White women made 73 cents to the dollar, and women of color made less than 50 cents to the dollar. And when I decided to become an actor, I thought, okay, well, I'll have more, I liked it, and I'll have more chance to do good stuff in the world. Well, it took a long time. And I worked in diversity and inclusion, international women's rights, global women's rights for my entire life. I became a traveler, traveled all over the globe, connecting, collecting women's stories. That's how Sylvia and I became friends. We're both women's history buffs. And to finally see this on screen, the amount of the things that we had to go through to get this movie made, to get it properly funded and marketed and seen, was an uphill battle, to say the least. So for me to see this film is really incredible. It's a culture-shifting movie. I can tell you more about that later, and we're going to make many more of them.
We'll talk more about that. Sylvia, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you are a trailblazing journalist and was the first Black journalist on public radio in France. How did a question from your lovely daughter, Bettina, who joins us in the audience here, inspire you to go about your research and creating and writing your book, Reign d'Afrique?
Thank you. I must apologize for my English. I'm French. Well, I began my researches for my own curiosity to try to find Black women who left their mark in the history of Africa, because generally Black women are never presented in a role model in the history, the so-called universal history. They never appear, they never exist. And so I began my research, and one day my daughter, she was at that time 8 years old, and she just saw the movie Pocahontas about a young Native American princess. And when we came at home, she told me a little puzzled, but why everywhere many people have famous woman. There is Pocahontas, there is Queen Victoria in UK, there is Joan of Arc in France, and there is Calamity Jane in USA. And we, what about us? Don't we exist before? And she wanted to, we, by people, black skinned people like us. And I was very troubled by that question, because as the 20th century, as the African continent is the most populated, most ancient populated continent in the world, and we have some children that think that Black people arrive after the rest of the humanity, because there are not tough history of Africa. It's brought me to try to make a book with all those researches I made for myself in And those research took me 10 years in Arabic and Western documentation, but also in oral sources, because I was lucky to travel a lot as journalist in the African continent. And so it's why a question of a child drove me to make that book.
And you gave us a great overview. And can you expand a little bit more about why it's imperative for more than just Black people to know history beyond slavery and colonialism?
Yes, because the history of Black people has never been translated by themselves. They colonized countries who colonized us and who made us in slavery, created our history and make it begin on slavery and colonization. But many people, even in the young generation, don't know what happened before that. And my book is the only one till now, and I was the only researcher to make that work, to try to bring people, general public, not only Black but all over the world, to show that a part of humanity has its own history and has participated to the construction of the humanity. And it's important to have a more equality in the consideration of each other, we and the other people of the world, to know that history, to have a better consideration. Because even big companies who work with those countries have a false view of those people, of those countries, because they are ignorant of that history.
And speaking of that, I do want to touch on history. October is Black History Month here in the UK. And there was, there has been some criticism, over the accuracy of the film. And can you expand on what you just started talking about the lack of knowledge in this case?
As an historian, in my book, Queens of Africa and Heroine of the Black Diaspora, we present 25 portraits of women from antiquity to the beginning of the 20th century. I speak on Amazon of the former kingdom of Dahomey. And I was one of the specialists still alive of that subject. So I read many criticisms, but most of them are from people who ignore the real history. This movie is not a documentary, it's a fiction, but it's the first time I saw a film that respects as deeply as possible, respect a certain reality of a country, of people, of a society at that period of the history of the humanity. So most of those criticisms are not really accurate, but if people try to know more about that history, I think that they will be less emotional in their reaction.
Thank you for that. I want to talk about commercial viability, and we do have a poll, so if everyone can pull your phone out and scan the QR code on the right-hand side of the screen. And our question is, why are there so few female-led films? Is it mostly male studio heads, which greenlight projects, a lack of funding support for diverse creatives overall, or limited audience appeal of female-led movies? So if you could place your vote.
Interesting.
I know.
Now is this working? Okay.
All right, so let's see, we're tallying up here. Okay, so we're a little close. Okay, so right now, sort of pretty evenly split. So Maria, Which one of these do you think is the biggest reason why?
All of it. And anyone in my industry who doesn't laugh at that graph, considering that we're a global market right now and that 50% of the world's population are women, more than 50% are the consumers of entertainment and media, we shouldn't even be asking that question anymore. Why are there so few female-led movies? There was one study that showed between 2007 and 2018, there were 4 female-led movies, action movies. Do you know how many male movies there were, action movies? 128. Half of those movies, more than half, tanked. They lost money. We, for many years, when I came up with this idea, thank God I had formidable, wonderful partners in Viola Davis and her husband, and I fought for years. I went to studios, to production companies, and they said there's no comps, which means financial comps, because there's never been a movie like this in the history of the world. When you say a historical drama set in Africa with all black women, they're like, I don't think so. That'll never make money. And I would say, look at Braveheart, look at Gladiator, look at Thor. You could go back through history of similar movies, but they all happen to star a white male. Now, Stacy Smith, who you might have met a few years ago, who was at the conference, all of her studies show people go to a movie because of the story, number one. It's not about a male or female lead. And now, is Hollywood making some strides? Yes. I'll tell you this, after Me Too, after the Black Lives Matter movement, little bits at a time, diversity and inclusion. But we got to the point where we were like, someone dared to offer us, okay, so Mel Gibson, in 1993, got $73 million to make Braveheart. This is a very similar script, better, I think, and story. We were offered $5 million. Wow. So I'm saying the inequity in financing is a huge thing in my industry. And I don't even want to talk about the pay, because I'm sure you've already heard this, but my entire career, I've made about 30 cents to the dollar that a male in my position made. Women of color have made even less than that. So are things changing in Hollywood? Yes, they are. But most of the studio heads are still, and the gatekeepers, pretty homogenous.
Mm-hmm. The movie debuted at #1. It's now grossed nearly $60 million over the past 5 weeks. How important was it for it to be this successful? And does that mean we'll see more of these projects going forward?
I and a group of people tried to prove for years the business case. We would have all these conferences and roundtables, because there's some great people in Hollywood too who are like, how do we get more female films, more diversity, more... And you know what, in the end, we figured out it's a business case. It's a business. It needs to make money. You have to prove that it can make money. Well, do you know when Black Panther came out, Hollywood had no idea that was going to make money. Everyone was like, oh, I can't believe it. Why can't you believe it? There's no films like that. Diversity is humanity right now. We are very diverse cultures. We're, a global community now. So it's taken them a bit to catch on. Now, when The Woman King came out, yes, it needed to make money to prove it will double its budget, right? So, P.S. we got more than $5 million finally to make the movie. But female films traditionally, in a genre, get a budget of 1/3 of what a male-driven movie gets. So all of these financial things, it had to be successful in order to show that people want to see these movies. And not only women have been going to this movie, men too. Like, I went to Braveheart and loved it. So to show that the commercial viability, we always say now, people talk about diversity and inclusion in our industry, and they're making little tiny steps with it. But what most people don't realize, and they're waking up to, is that
diversity is the thing that sells. Diversity is profitability. And we're seeing that over and over again. So we have opportunities now to tell the 25 stories in Sylvia's book and many more stories over the globe with our network.
So do you feel now that the term risky bet when it comes to diverse cast, that it's risky to support those projects we've had, Parasite, Squid Game, huge hits for Netflix. So are those exceptions to the rule or the new normal?
It's the new normal. But Hollywood always thought those ventures were risky. There were 2 movies this last year with male directors, and they tanked. They each lost $100 million. Okay? That's risky. It's risky that half of your movies in the studio that are very homogenous, that are based on white American, European male sensibility, that they tank, right? They're losing money there. So what we're seeing is the greatest profits right now, particularly because it's becoming a global a global community, and that shows with Squid Games, that shows with Parasite. When I went to Hollywood a few years ago, I had a project that was a global project, right? People from all over the globe in it. And they said, well, audiences won't read subtitles. Audience only want to see, American, European stuff. Well, we've shaken that on its head as well. And we do want new stories from all over the globe. And that's the thing that really will connect us.
And speaking of which, your book, what are your plans? Are there plans to translate it into English, to turn some of these 25 stories that you've collected over the years into projects?
Yes, my deepest aim is to have this book translated in English, because since 17 years, English-speaking people beg me every year to have this book translated in English. But in France, there was a great resistance, because it's an overview of the history of Africa that the colonial history taught everywhere. And it's why my former publisher, French one, didn't want that English translation, but I've changed now. And I hope that I will be heard, and this book can bring many role models, because speaking of women is speaking of society, speaking of a country, speaking of communities, because women work daily to build the life of the country by educating new generation, by working in the economy, but they are invisible. And those women I present in my book also are wearing values that are universal, proud, the sense of freedom, and some of the values that we can find in every countries, in every people on the earth, But the only heroes I knew from my childhood till now are Western heroes. Those values are everywhere. It's why my contribution want to change that and to make that in the mind of people all the world, that we share many things, and we deserve to be heard also.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, you mentioned the funding challenges you had, with the Woman King. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you're working to decentralize financing and supporting more social justice content going forward?
Yes. I'm really excited to announce this new venture, this company. What we realized throughout the years is that companies now, you're doing it as well, you're starting to have divisions of inclusivity and diversity. We have built a company with incredible partners. I would say the female OG executive of my business, who wrote the fucking playbook on diversity and inclusivity and proved, and over many years, like, this is the way the money is. This is where the money goes. So we have an incredible team of people that assembled quite quickly. We have women creators mining stories on 6 of the 7 continents. If anyone knows anyone from Antarctica, please let us know. It's the only country we don't have. And we have a few good men who are, again, formidable older OGs in our business that have always hired women, that have always seen this, and that are like, okay, it's time. Market, global, money, let's go. So I'll be able to tell you more about it in the next month. We're going to be announcing it, but you know, we don't have to worry in our company about doing classes on diversity and inclusion and incremental steps, because our entire company is built on those principles, and we would never go away from that.
Mm-hmm. All right, our final question, you know, we always like to have a call to action. So Sylvia, what is something that our esteemed audience in the room and watching virtually, what is something they can do today?
Oh, to help us, to help us to have much more stories like that, like the Woman King, but there is many other stories around the world, not only African or Black women, but as it's the first time, it's a first step with the Woman King, but we have so many models to show, and I would like that people can help us to bring, because literature and school don't show that history, don't show that heroism of Black women or other people who are heroic. And only cinema can do that, because it's such a very, very large public. And it's that role of education, and I hope that we can be helped to make that work. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Maria?
And speaking of profitability, this book needs to be translated into English. We need to have this book in English. There is no other book on African female heroes in history ever, and we need these stories. So if there's a publisher out there, give it. Come see me and Sylvia and Janine, our keeper of stories over there, our chief storyteller. Yeah, we're going to get this book published.
All right, we must leave it there. Thank you so much, Maria Bello and Sylvia Sorbonne. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Our full power until we know our full history. We need to learn. Cheers. Thank you all.
Please welcome back to the stage Bloomberg's Rakshita Saluja.
Love the jacket, love the movie. Just had to get that out there. But I really, on behalf of Bloomberg, just wanted to thank everyone for joining the Bloomberg Equality Summit. We hope you enjoyed the conversations as much as we did. Thank you to all our speakers and to our moderators for a wonderful program. Thank you to our presenting sponsors, BCG and Principal Asset Management, for making the summit possible. If you'd like more information from our sponsors, please visit the Resources tab on the events website. And most of all, thank you to this audience over here. You were very engaged with all the polls and the Q&A. To watch any of the event, you can return to bloomberglive.com, Bloomberg Equality Summit, to view on demand. Thank you all. Have a good evening.